Hello and happy Monday. Welcome to another Money Monday hosted by Purse Strings. My name is Maggie, and for those of you new to these Money Mondays, Purse Strings is here to provide some financial education, tips, know-hows, get those wheels turning. And then when you're ready to, put some things in transition or transaction, you get a windfall, you have a divorce, you have a kid, you just want to take in charge of your finances. We have top tier financial professionals willing, ready, and able to serve you. And those could be realtors, attorneys, CPAs, financial advisors. And we call all those professionals our Purse Strings approved professionals. Olivia is here and Anne, and they are Purse Strings approved professionals. And today we are going to be talking about life transitions after divorce, specifically kind of focusing on Social Security, the house, and if you have children with special needs. But before we dive into all of that, would you two ladies give a little introduction of who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Olivia St. Clair Long. I am the principal attorney at my firm, O Long Law, LLC. We are located in the North Shore area of Chicagoland, so we are based in Evanston, and we do family law and commercial litigation. I have a business litigation background as well as a long family law background, and we try to really bring clarity and closure to people's family law problems. And Anne is someone that I work with at my firm.
Awesome.
And Anne's going to tell you who she is.
Sure. My name is Anne Whiting. Thank you for having us here today. It's such a treat to be with you guys. My background is finance. I've been a financial professional for about 15 some years and came on with Olivia to just sort of give an added dimension to our clients when we're trying to find solutions for their family law problems, really looking at the holistic approach and taking into consideration putting you on your best path forward financially as well.
So important as you go through divorce. So I'm so excited to have you guys here and kind of bring up some of these topics. Like we were talking about right before we jumped on, life transitions after divorce could be so many things. So I'm glad we're just kind of focusing on these three little nuggets today, which I know are a lot of top of mind questions. So we're going to start with Social Security and divorce. I can just prompt you, how do they know their benefits? Or, people are always like, what if I remarry or a pension? Can you dive into some of these topics that are, those common questions people have?
Sure. So I'll start with just some super flyover basics. The first thing is Social Security, as everyone knows, is a federal program. It's not administered by states. And so things are going to change state to state a lot with respect to Social Security. For example, Social Security benefits are taxed from the federal government if you make over a certain amount of money, which is pretty low. It's like $23,000 a year for an individual and 32 maybe thousand for a couple. So if you have over that amount of income in a year, you will have your benefits taxed. But there are about 12 states that also tax Social Security benefits. Illinois is not one of them. California is not one of them. And those are the states I know about. So I know that there's a list. And so does my state tax Social Security benefits is something that you might want to know with respect to whether you're receiving them or how much you're receiving. The other thing that's interesting about it being a state versus a federal program is that divorce is a state law issue. So that means that when in divorce, you make provisions for Social Security in some people's divorce agreements, that's really not allowed and it's in no way enforceable because state law doesn't control federal law. It's the other way around. So we actually know of specific case law in Illinois, and I know it's true in every other state as well, that Social Security is not supposed to be considered in the division of property in divorce at all. Wow. And so that's supposed to be completely a separate thing. However, there are some really important reasons, especially for government workers, why taking it into consideration anyway might be appropriate when you're trying to divide benefits trying to divide especially defined benefit programs from government employees in a divorce. And Anne can tell you a little more about that.
Sure. Thanks, Olivia. Right. The points that Olivia touched on are fantastic. That the program really is a federal program. So if your MSA or your settlement agreement does talk about Social Security, it's considered moot. Like you really have to follow federal law. That being said, there's a couple of different quick ways. Maggie, you mentioned, how can people really check their benefits? There's a fantastic website called My Social Security. I think it's, if you Google Social Security, you'll see it. It's mysocialsecurity.gov or something like that. And you can register and you can log on and see your work history. You can see your estimated benefits at retirement. One thing you can't see, though, like for those listeners who are already divorced, if you've been married for more than 10 years and you were the lesser breadwinner, you actually are entitled to a benefit to collect on your ex-spouse's benefits. Now, if you were to get remarried somewhere before your turn age 65, those can go away. So that's one thing that we do talk about for people too, if they're looking to do a prenup or that sort of thing, to kind of really pay attention to, did you qualify from a previous relationship for Social Security benefits off of your spouse? Specifically, if they've earned quite a bit more than you, that might be beneficial. There might be reasons to delay that second marriage or take a look at that. And that's one of the many things that we take a look at here at Along Law for you. That being said, you can go online and take a look at that. If you wanted to see what you would qualify for your ex-spouses, what you would need is either their Social Security number or you would need their birth date and place of birth. And the nice folks at the Social Security Administration are very friendly. They will help you walk you through that and kind of see, you don't need to contact your ex-spouse to try to get that information if it's fractious. So that's a nice thing. Olivia, go ahead.
However, if you did get divorced recently, your divorce attorney probably has a tax return, and the tax return almost certainly has your Social Security number on it. So you could probably do that pretty easily.
Very true. Very true. Olivia touched on a little bit about the idea with pension. So that's when it can get a little tricky. And this is when we're thinking about, someone getting divorced, we take a look at the whole picture. We look at the marital estate in total, which means all of the benefits. There's a provision in the law. There's actually two of them actually that kind of take a look at. There's one called the windfall elimination. And then there's another one that's the pension offset. And there's a little different caveats to both. But basically what it means is if you qualify for a pension benefit that is outside the scope of Social Security. So think of like a teacher, a firefighter, that kind of thing, where they're not putting into Social Security and they get a pension. Social Security will do an offset. So if you receive those benefits, let's say $1,000 of benefits, they're going to do a little math and reduce your Social Security take. So we've had situations where we have one partner, qualifies for Social Security, the other partner qualifies for a pension. And if they go after if the other party goes after that pension, they can actually reduce the entire marital estate by negating some of those Social Security benefits. So that's one of the things that we take a look at, really, again, just trying to set you up on your best path forward, if that makes sense.
Those are all some great pieces of advice. And I know I was surprised the first time I heard about, the Social Security, you could take the match kind of your ex-spouses. And you don't have to do much paperwork or anything with them to make that happen, which is nice if you haven't talked to them in a while or something like that. You can still just get some of those benefits.
And one of the other things to think about are people whose ex-spouses have died.
Oh.
Because you still may be eligible to receive a widow's benefit, men are to receive a widower's benefit from that. So it's still worth looking it up. And if it changes a lot when you turn 60. Lots of things really change. So it's really important to look up like Social Security retirement benefits women. There's a ton of good information on the Social Security website specifically geared toward women, because there have been a ton of changes over the last 40 years or so about the way that women retirement is funded, based on the fact that now the laws have really changed to recognize the fact that many women work outside the home, versus before, though the collections rules were very different when many women did not work outside the home. So there's been a watershed change. It's really important to look it up, especially because SSA provides you, the Social Security Administration provides you with a lot of really good resources, especially geared toward women about that. But if you have a child who became disabled before age 22 and they're over 16, you can have a lot of benefit availability that you might not know. If you have a child who, if your ex-spouse dies and you have the child that you're still raising and they're not of the age of majority yet, these are really good reasons to look into Social Security benefits, because a lot of times kids whose parents are deceased do have more benefits available to them.
These are all great things, because I hear so many stories of just, you don't know what you don't know, and there's a lot of cash left on the table. And so you just want to make sure you can get as much as you can, because it's there and it's yours.
You paid into it.
I wanted to mention one quick thing, Maggie. One of the pushbacks I typically get with people when we're in this position is, I don't want to reduce their benefits. And I think that's one thing that's very important about Social Security versus like a traditional pension plan. If you were to negotiate getting a marital portion of your ex-spouse's pension plan, that will likely reduce their benefits. It is not the case for Social Security. If you qualify as a former spouse, your ex-spouse doesn't even need to know that you qualified to take off their benefits, and it does not reduce their amount whatsoever. So I think that that's something that's very confusing for people to kind of get their arms around that, and why we sometimes see it written into marriage settlement agreements because people are worried they're going to lose their benefits, and that's just not how the program is designed.
The federal government is a much bigger pot than the city of Chicago, for example. Like people can collect, let's say that you were married for more than 10 years and you're not remarried, but your ex-spouse is. Both of their new wife could collect and you could collect. It's not,
and no one's affected by each other, which is
right.
It's not a pie. There's more for everyone.
Right. We're paying right now for the people who are collecting, I'm 40 and there are people who are 70 who are collecting, and the money I'm paying in right now is what they are collecting, not the money they paid in when that was paying for old people then. Right. So
the worst thing that could happen is if someone decides to not pursue it simply because they were told it would hurt the other person's benefits, is just kind of walking them through that if you qualify, you qualify.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think these have been a ton of great starting points for Social Security. If people, are thinking about getting divorced or have been divorced, there's a lot of things you can look into, a lot of great resources. Also, call up a professional, because clearly you can see that there are so many details, nuances, ages, dates going on there. So you just want to make sure you get what you're entitled to. And, that doesn't always mean it affects others as well.
Right. You really want to talk to a financial professional, a financial advisor who's well-versed in Social Security, et cetera, because obviously you can read a lot on the website. They do have a lot of resources, but calling SSA, good luck.
Don't reinvent the wheel. Call up a professional. So next, the big question is always the house. Keeping the house in a divorce, is it really a good idea? Should you downsize? There's a lot of emotion there. I'm going to let you two ladies just go at it here and give us some insights.
Go ahead, Anne.
Sure. I love this topic because I think that this is an area that, Maggie, you hit the nail on the head. It is an emotional decision. And oftentimes there is this comfort level in staying in your home. There's an attachment to the home. But that isn't necessarily always the best financial decision to put you and your children or your other family members in the best path. So what we try to do here at Olong Law is really take a sort of an eagle's perch, larger back end view of, what is going to be the best for you. And it can be hard. And I understand that we are a little bit in unprecedented times. Well, I shouldn't say unprecedented. I think my parents lived through these sort of interest rate environment that we're in right now, but we're in a really tricky time right now. We haven't quite seen, house prices come down to reflect the interest rates, but the interest rates have exploded, they've more than doubled. So, we're in a time where really taking a look and feeling like you can talk this decision out with someone who is a trusted professional I would really encourage you to do that, to not just automatically assume, however we're going to do it, I'm going to keep the house, because the cash flow, they said, this was just the other day, I heard this, the median house price right now is about $500,000. Interest rates 2 years ago were at 2.5%. Now they're over 6%. That equates to a lifetime of a mortgage of over $150,000 of extra interest you are paying over the lifetime of that mortgage. So keeping the house has become, I think, a different financial decision. And again, I would just encourage, if for any of your listeners who are considering divorce, going through divorce, or just post-divorce, to re-examine that.
So I'm going to start kind of from a different perspective than Anne, because I think that one of the things that I hear from the very beginning from people is they have a lot of creative ideas about how somebody can keep the house. And a lot of it is based around kids. Right. So obviously, a lot of people have had a school district choice that is tied up into where they live. And a lot of people live in environments where there isn't a lot of mixed use. If you live in a single family home and you're in a planned neighborhood and it feeds to a school, a lot of times there isn't somewhere like an apartment or a condo to move, because that's not the way the land use has been designed. So this is a massive decision for people. And so they get creative with certain decisions like, hey, why don't I live in the house and my husband, who's not here anymore, pays the mortgage, and I live here, he pays for it, and then we sell it in 5 years. Right. So you should be hearing red flags, because number one, you guys are getting divorced for a reason. Right. So the level of trust and communication is probably not at an all-time high, I would say, in that relationship. So there's that. There's also the part where, as Anne says, although we are, currently in, I would argue, still historically low interest rate environment, that's because interest rates were in 19% in the 90s.
Yeah.
So, homes are it's still really, really cheap money to get a mortgage, but it's galling because it's not 2% like it was 2 years ago. And we all remember that. But the other thing is you don't know where it's going. It could be 12% in 5 years and you don't know. And so you don't know what that will do to affect the price of the asset when you do wish to sell it. Then there's the capital gains tax issue. You got to talk with somebody who knows more about capital gains than I do. But here's what I do know. When you sell your primary residence, you have a carve out where you don't have to pay taxes on a certain amount of increase in value that you get. And if you're married, that increase in value is $500,000. That is a ton of increased value in a house, like maybe impossible, right? A lot. If you're single, if you're divorced, and it's a certain amount of time after the divorce, that number is $250,000. So you may be looking at a different tax environment based on the decisions that you're making with respect to selling the house. So it is really important to talk to a financial advisor about, or a financial professional in general, about what you can expect if you do hang on to the house. Yeah. The other thing that most people don't know is when you're going to refinance the house, that's what you have to do. If somebody's going to keep the house and get the other person not an owner anymore. So the way to get them to not be an owner anymore, assuming you have a mortgage, which is what we're talking about. If you own your house free and clear, we have a completely different discussion, right? So if you don't, if you're like almost all homeowners at the age where you have school age children, you almost certainly have a mortgage. So in that situation, you have a person who is going to refinance, thereby losing their good old interest rate, getting into a higher interest rate, having the person who used to help them with the mortgage no longer on there anymore, meaning your credit has to stand alone, right? And your assets have to stand alone when you're figuring out who's going to take it. This is a major undertaking. And then you also have a fun thing where you get you try to do it before the divorce is final, and it has to be done in a certain number of days. Otherwise the rate goes up and it's not locked in anymore. And your ex knows that certain number of days exists. And now they start bargaining with you on the 50th day because you have 60 days of a rate lock. And now they want something extra so that you can keep it instead of going up 2 points or whatever it is. So there's a bunch of different stuff that we have to talk about that you might not even have thought about with respect to the two main options: sell the house, get the other person off the house by means of a refinance. Then there's the murky middle of well, what if we keep it and do this other creative thing? And obviously, as an attorney who is risk averse, I'm going to tell you, yeah, no, probably not.
We can work with clients if there is if that is the only way to keep the kids in the school district, things like that. We absolutely, have the ways to do agreed orders and whatnot to it. But we do try to steer people to have the cleanest break possible, if that makes sense, so that you really kind of don't have that kind of hanging over your head and kind of murking up the waters, because we really want people to be in a place where you are on your best financial sitting. And now the focus going forward can really be, especially when there are kids involved, on the kids, instead of it being these, loose strings attached financial decisions that can weigh on everyone.
Yeah. Or, you get in a real bad decision and the person who's living in the house is not the one who's supposed to be paying the mortgage, or vice versa. Sometimes they are. So they're living in the house. They're supposed to be paying the mortgage. They're not. And now this house is going into foreclosure. The other person now has a house in foreclosure that they don't live in and aren't supposed to pay for and didn't budget paying for. And now you have to litigate that. What do you do? And this is not a hypothetical, as in it never happens. This is happening to 2 clients that we have right now. A situation where the person who's living in the house is not paying and going, well, sue me. It's not a good place to be.
Which sounds like in the end, it costs a lot more money, bottom line to deal with. But then, it's the cost of keeping up the house. I have no idea how much new screens cost, or getting the house painted, or, getting the exterminator, whatever it may be, which adds up after a while, especially when you're on one paycheck.
Well, and Anne brought something up really, really important the other day when we were talking about a client of ours and who's doing the math on this. The utility bills are out of control right now.
Yes.
Not even doing the upkeep that Maggie just pointed out, but literally keeping the lights on is a completely different financial prospect than it was about a year ago.
It's completely different. And you have to think about those are all of the decision making points about, what does this look like really for me to cash flow this? And again, what I like to say to clients is, your dream is kind of changed. It's not over, It's not done, but it's changed. And so this is a really kind of a blank page place where you can take a look at and say, how do I want my life to look for the next 10, 15 years? And there's sometimes there's just loss that, feels, you just have to kind of mourn it. And there was that dream that's sort of different, but, there's so much hope. And I think ability to carve out a new dream and taking a look at what are my new options going forward? And sometimes a fresh new start, a fresh new place that better fits you going forward. It's a rough transition, but it can be sometimes the best choice.
And it's, if these walls could talk, right? Like you don't have bad memories in a new house.
Right. That's a great point. And, if we're talking about more of the gray divorce, where let's say the kids are up and out and it's just the two of you, a lot of times we say, what are your values? What are your goals right now? And somebody else was like, I would love to be traveling 3 out of 4 weeks out of the year. Okay, then there's no reason to keep a big house that you don't even want to be in. Like, use that money for your travels and for nice dinners out and things like that. Now that you're single again and no kids, you want to live your best life. And so you realize, I don't want the house. You just thought that, the quick thoughts right away, which I get it. You just do have to have a professional talk you through those different things and really figure out what do you want that new chapter to look like.
Right. To your point and to Anne's point, I kind of think part of the discussion here, is what are we transitioning to? Right? Because if we lose, if everything feels like loss, like, wow, I had this idea that this is how it was going to be, then you're going to want to hold on to stuff that maybe it's not really worth holding on to. Right. And so if you do have this idea of like, well, as long as they stay in their school district, actually one of them's 15 and one of them's 17. So it kind of would be nice to have that house money for college for them. And that maybe is the thing that we need to transition into. So is there maybe a condo? Can I rent a house? Like, what are we talking about here? You have a house because you want to support your family with it. The vast majority of middle-class people in this country use their house to help support their family and pay for stuff. And so why not do that?
Yeah. These are all great pieces of advice and, just good food for thought if you're, if you're in any part of the stage or even just afterwards, and you realize the house wasn't the best thing for you, you can still sell it.
One thing I did want to point out is people oftentimes conflate, well, I can't leave the house because then I can't have parenting time with my kids. Or I can't leave the house because then the judge will give the kids to the other side. Or we can't, like they put house and kids together even more so than we've been doing in this conversation. And what I'll tell you is that is unlikely to be true. One of the things that fancy people who are used to single family homes or more than one single family home don't remember is that many people cannot afford a median home price of $500,000, which means your judge sees people where both parties are living in an apartment or with family all the time.
Yeah.
And they raise their kids fine.
Definitely. It's not just the roof over your head that makes a good child. Right. So these are all great things to think about. Again, talk to a professional because the 60-day thing you were talking about, there are so many different nuances. Again, you just want to make sure you're crossing all those T's and dotting all those I's. And then last but not least, we kind of want to talk about if you have a child with special needs, how do you prioritize their financial security and advocate for that, adult child?
Yeah, so this is partially a divorce question, but it's mostly an issue of estate planning and guardianship, in my opinion. Yeah. So in Illinois, we do have a section of the law that specifically provides for support for a non-minor child with a disability. So if you have a situation where you realize that your child is disabled to the point where they really have their ability for self-support strongly compromised, and you're going to have to do an inquiry to the court to prove that the child is not self-supporting. And if the child can't qualify for disability from the Social Security Administration, it is going to be pretty hard to claim to the court that they are not self-supporting, right? Because if the Social Security Administration says you don't get benefits because you can be self-supporting, it's pretty hard for the court to say something different. So but it's not a slam dunk one way or another. Another issue might be like guardianship. If you don't have to get guardianship for your child because your child is actually capable of making their own financial and life decisions, then how are they disabled enough to qualify for this support, right? So there's going to be a factual issue with that. But let's say for the sake of argument that this is a person where there's really no argument that they are disabled enough, right? Yeah. This person's disabled. Okay, cool. So the parents maybe didn't make a plan when they were getting divorced when the child was younger. Maybe they didn't know the level of the disability or the severity of something, or horribly something happened in a car accident later or whatever, right? Then you, in Illinois, you can petition for support for a non-minor child with a disability. You want to do that as soon as you know that that's going to be an issue. The longer you wait, the less money you get, because usually support things are backdated to the time you file them, even if it takes a couple of years to figure out what's going on with it. So that's just from a purely divorce perspective. But a lot of this has to do with people who do probate work, which means guardianship. and estate planning, because there are certain types of estate plans that make a way for a disabled person to hold assets, and those assets not to count against them for the purposes of receiving benefits. And I think, Ann, you know a little more about that than I do.
No, that Olivia touched. I would say that my big takeaway from what Olivia just shared is the fact that, every state has different ways of handling this. So again, depending on, where your listeners are coming in from, this is something that, I would say for the vast majority of people listening to this today, it probably doesn't apply to them, but everybody knows someone. Everybody knows someone that has a situation. Myself, I can share this. My mom's older brother had a traumatic brain injury when he was 11, and I was his co-guardian until he passed away in his late 50s. And so for me, this is something that hits very close to home. I watched my grandparents, try to make these decisions his whole life. And I think that that's something that, Olivia has a ton of experience as well with friends and family and different cases that we've had that we've worked with this. There are so many nuances to this part of understanding that if you are going through a divorce, your child is not going to fall through the cracks. There are so many amazing things that we can negotiate for and services that are out there and different paths to find a solution, whether it's guardianship, whether it's, the Social Security benefits that we touched on earlier. It's just really making sure that you're proactively advocating and asking the right questions and surrounding yourself with the professionals that take the time to understand these things. And there's a lot that aren't. There are a lot of, attorneys out there. There are a lot of financial advisors that don't really understand this area. And this is just, it's not a given. It's just asking those questions.
I think those are all great points. I mean, we all can't specialize in everything. And so you do have to find that right person for your situation. But like you were saying, it's not one of the estate plans or whatever. So you can have some finances without losing your Social Security benefits. I mean, that's a huge one I've learned about in having a loved one with special needs, because so many people want to give money or help donate, but you also don't want them to just have to use all that money and it cuts off Social Security. So it's a whole game that you have to play and know it's being done right.
Yeah, you have to set up, there are people who specialize in special needs trusts and they know how to do that. You have to set up vehicles to hold money and for those to be distributed properly in accordance with the law, usually often by a professional trustee, right, who knows how to distribute them. And then, for example, you as a parent not only want to plan for a post-divorce life while you are still living for your special needs child, but in the event of your death, you need to plan for what's going to happen with that special needs child. Right? Because that person, if they are truly an adult incapable of self-support, you're going to need to figure out, okay, so there's community living options that people have now that they didn't have. How do we find one? You might want to move to one sooner than later, so that person is taken care of by that community sooner than later, and they don't have to move upon your death. Right? This is, as anybody with the disabled loved one knows, this is a lifelong second job that, of course, you're blessed to undertake, but it is not simple.
Right. And you have to know, the characteristics of that person and what they might need and how they might communicate. And, having someone pass is traumatizing as it is. It's always very hard. But yeah, maybe moving sooner, making sure that plan is in place and they have heard about the plan and know what's upcoming and things like that. It's very important.
How your life insurance is set up and where it's set up to pay to.
Yeah.
Just, certain basics that are different for people who are non-disabled, and there are ways to make it work for people who are disabled, but you don't want to, I think Anne makes a really good point. You got to ask some specific questions. There are tons of really great advocacy organizations that are free for people who are parents of adult children with disabilities or for older, even younger children with disabilities, all sorts of caretakers organizations. And this is one of the main things they talk about is financial planning to take care of and augment people's benefits. And so this is one of these things where you can learn a couple of buzzwords and good questions to ask professionals. And you can learn those things for free at this advocacy organization. And then you can talk to people, because not every single financial advisor knows what they're doing when they're setting this stuff up at all.
Right.
Yeah, I actually, just to touch on that too, circling back to the whole idea of divorce, there, when you realize that is the right choice for you, you realize that is the right path for you. I think there are so many doubts that can bubble up in our minds of, am I making the right decision? How is this going to impact my kids? How is this going to impact my financial security? And I would just say, there are law firms like ours, we're here in Chicago, that really take these things into account, that take a look at your whole picture. And just because, you're not unsure of your retirement, maybe you were working inside the home and not outside the home, there are a lot of different ways that we can make sure that you're on a good, solid path, including if you have an adult child with special needs. It's not that the answer has to be no, I can't possibly do this on my own. We can help try to find a path.
I think that's great to talk about and to bring up. And we have so many CDFAs, which are Certified Divorce Financial Analysts, who can be super helpful in these different things as well. So there are people out there who are, their sole job is to know about this, to support you in it, and to go through it. And most of the women we work with, as hard as it is, went through terrible divorces, and this is why they do it, because they want to help you and make that process a lot smoother and less painful. I think we've gone through a ton.
Sorry, real quick. I think some people feel intimidated in talking to a professional because they feel like, well, I don't have enough assets to make this worth their while, right? So I just want to let you know, like, don't make that decision by yourself, right? Like, you don't know the necessarily the way that anybody gets compensated. Some of my lights to turn on. It's very aggressive. So sorry about that. Hang on. If I stand up, it'll work. There we go. So throwing the white out didn't help. Sad. But in any case, like, when you speak to somebody, when you speak to an attorney, when you speak to a financial professional, you're allowed to ask, okay, so how do you get paid on this work? Right? How can I expect to, how are you compensated by working with me? This is a fine question. It's not rude to ask us who are professionals in this field. And we expect to have to tell you that. So if you were like, oh, well, I don't want to call this financial advisor because unless I have like $1 million in assets, which is what my friend of a friend who was a financial advisor said they wanted, then there's no reason for me to talk to them. Somebody was shocked when I was talking about, well, when people have, over $100,000 in assets, then they need a trust because otherwise their estate will go to probate. And they go, well, that's not that many people. And I go, well, it's, if you own a house, it's probably you. Like that, you don't think of that as like liquid cash, but like it doesn't have to be liquid cash. It's an asset. So there are things like that. So I would really encourage folks to call people who you may think are, for folks who are an echelon fancier than you might not know.
Great point. And almost every professional has a free 20 minutes that you can ask some of these questions, make sure it's a good fit. So it's not even like you have to go in paying money. You can just make sure it's a good vibe. They have that skill set that you're looking for, and whatever your situation may be, and you can ask them how they're charged. And if you feel comfortable with that, awesome. You can go that route. We covered a ton of great things today. Are there any last pieces of tips, tricks, or advice that you want to make sure our audience hears before we sign off? I know, big question.
I think I covered what I wanted to cover. The main thing that I wanted to say is just like, you need to ask for help in the process. The process is difficult and it's time consuming and demanding, and you need to ask for help. So I'm really glad that Purse Strings exists as a resource, because there are many different people who do this many different times. And it doesn't make your case, one in a list of everything that we always treat everybody the same. It's not like that. But, think about your job. You're probably really, really good at whatever you do. You probably don't need to be told the basics every day, right? Because you know how to do it. Even if your job is making sure that the PTA is run with a ruthless efficiency, there's still things that someone new would need to learn that you don't need to learn. And so that's why we can really help save you a ton of time. Like our work, we really pride ourselves on creating efficiencies for our clients and telling them information that they really need to know.
I love it.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is, divorce is one of the top 5, right? They say death of a loved one, loss of a job, all these different things that are the big traumatic things, and divorce is right up there. So I would just say for your listeners, if you're going through divorce, if you're thinking about it, if you're post-divorce, pat yourself on the back. This is a big life decision. Surround yourself with professionals who care, who are knowledgeable. Ask questions. And back to Olivia's point, ask how they get paid. Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the things you should ask, because you have that transparency. It's going to help that trust relationship. And again, it's really focusing on, this is the time for you to focus on, how am I putting myself on the best path forward?
And if you don't ask them how they get paid now, you're going to be talking about money later anyway. Like, that's what this entire thing is about. We just did a half an hour deep dive on a bunch of things that you probably didn't even think top of mind. Maybe the house you did, but the amount that we're going to all talk about money together cannot be overstated. So you might as well start when it's good for you.
If we're not talking about money, we're not learning about money. So thank you both for coming on today. Olivia's email has been going through the bottom, so you could reach out to her through email, or she's also one of our Purse Strings approved professionals. So you could check her out on our site, pursestrings.co. And then we will be back here again next week with some more great information. But if you have any questions, reach out to Olivia, reach out to Purse Strings. We're more than happy to help you. So until then, everyone have a great week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.